Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As always, it's an honor to speak in this House on behalf of my constituents from Surrey North. Mr. Speaker, this is an important bill. I come from British Columbia along the coast. We have many, many families, fishermen that are supported by the fishing industry. This bill is extremely important to British Columbians and to many, many fishermen, people living in my constituency. Mr. Speaker, this bill basically requires for Canada to be able to ratify the UN agreement on port-state measures to prevent, deter, and eliminate illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, which Canada signed in 2010. And Mr. Speaker, although we signed this in 2010, I know my colleagues in this House agree that we need to this is a good bill. This is a sign of us being part of the international community, to work with the international community to preserve, not only preserve, but manage our fishing resources. Yet it took this government 4 years to bring this bill into this House. Not only that, Mr. Speaker, if you notice, this bill has S front of it. And those are people that are listening at home. So this bill was actually introduced in the Senate, the unelected Senate, unethical Senate, it's unaccountable Senate. So I would have preferred we introduced that bill here in this House that is represented by the people. So that's a small issue, Mr. Speaker, but I did wanted to point that out. Mr. Speaker, illegal and unreported and unregulated fishing undermines sustainable practices of legitimate fishing operations, and including those in Canada, and presents unfair market competition to sustainable food. So what's the issue, Mr. Speaker? There's some estimates from a number of different studies which point out to that this estimates that there's economic loss to the worldwide due to pirated fishing ranges from $10 billion to $23 billion annually, and that represents approximately 40% of the catch. And Mr. Speaker, commercial fisheries in Canada here, it contributes about $5.4 billion in economic activities in this country. Not only that, it generates approximately 71,000 jobs across this country, on the West Coast and also on the East Coast, Mr. Speaker. So there's two issues, Mr. Speaker, a couple of issues that I want to point out before I continue, Mr. Speaker. Two issues. One issue is about conservation, ensuring, because fish aren't unlimited. We know that there's a limited resources. So in order, we must obviously make sure that we regulate, we prevent this illegal fishing, unregulated fishing, unreported fishing, and in order to ensure sustainability of this resource that provides many, many jobs, not only in Canada but worldwide. And it's a source of food that is very much valued across nations. So we must work with other countries to ensure that this is sustained. On the other aspect of it, Mr. Speaker, we have to manage and ensure sustainability. We also have to enhance fishing stocks. How do we do that? There's many, many ways to do that, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to get into that because the record of this government in regards to enhancing the fishing stocks, the environment, has been terrible. And we've heard in this House the cuts that are being made to the Fisheries and Oceans Department, the cuts to surveillance. It's fine and dandy to bring a bill in to ensure that we're going to protect the fish, unregulated, illegal fishing, and unreported fishing. But if there's no substance or teeth in this particular legislation, how are we going to ensure that this bill, this law, is implemented? What we've seen from this government over the last 4 years, 3 years that I've been here, but before that, we've seen cut after cut after cut to the very people that enforce these regulations, enforce these laws. And we've heard in this House today that somebody pointed out there's $4.2 million that was cut in the surveillance part of it. Then I heard the parliamentary secretary point out, well, it's not that. Well, how much is it? Even the parliamentary budget officer, Mr. Speaker, has tried to get information from departments in regards to where the cuts are, who is it affecting, and yet this government, departments, whether it's Fisheries Department, whether it's military, whether it's defense, all of these departments under this government are refusing to provide information to the parliamentary budget officer so that we can determine where the cuts are. So, on one hand, the parliamentary secretary says, well, the cuts aren't that much. Well, how much are they? Let us know. Let Canadians know that how much of the cuts are to these departments. And we've seen, when I talk about, Mr. Speaker, on the sustainability side of it, and we've seen cuts to the environment. 99% of our lakes, 99% of our rivers have been removed by this government from the Environment Protection Act. So, Mr. Speaker, on one hand, yes, we are trying to ensure illegal fishing, unreported fishing is protected, and not only protected, but we curtail that. On the other hand, we need to ensure we provide environment habitats for these fish to flourish and these fish to come into our rivers. And yet we've seen cut after cut in these areas where we're failing to protect. Not where this government is failing to protect, Mr. Speaker. And we've seen from the Cohen report, that's another side of things. I come from British Columbia, Mr. Speaker, and there's 1 year you will get, this year actually we had a bumper fish coming into the Fraser River. We had 26 million, estimates are 26 million fish came into the Fraser River. And we have other years, we don't see as many fish coming into British Columbia, Mr. Speaker, and that is because they've made some cuts to scientists. We need to understand what the oceans are all about. And yet this government has made cuts to scientists. They've not only made cuts to scientists that actually study these oceans to find out what the habitat is, how fish behave. Yet not only they made cuts, they've actually eliminated a number of facilities that actually monitor these kinds of experiments. So we had the Coleman report. I talked about fish coming into British Columbia through the rivers. We've seen, Mr. Speaker, year after year where 1 year we get so many fish and another year we don't get as many. So, Mr. Speaker, in order for us to protect our fishing resources, to ensure that these fish actually, we understand them, we need to invest in science. We need to invest in enforcement. And yet, time after time after time, we've seen this government shirk their responsibility in regards to ensuring that well-being of our families, not only the jobs that are being provided today are protected, but they're protected in years to come, next generations to come. That is how you work with the international community to ensure treaties like this are actually implemented. So I do commend for them to bring this into this treaty, implementation of this treaty to protect unregulated, illegal and unreported fish to this out. Yet we need to work with the international community to ensure more countries sign on to this treaty to ensure its implementation. As you know, Mr. Speaker, there's only a handful of countries that have actually signed this, and we need a minimum 25 countries in order to ensure that this is implemented. And Mr. Speaker, I'm just going to have a drink here. And working with international committees, countries, that's something that under this government we have lost, Mr. Speaker. And I'll give you an example. It's only, fish don't see boundaries. They travel around from one country to another, one ocean to another. So we need to work with other countries. But the record of this government, Mr. Speaker, has been horrible. There was a time where we were viewed as peacemakers, where we were viewed, Canada was viewed as a country that would bring others together. Yet that is not the case, Mr. Speaker. And I'll give you a prime example of that. In the history, the history of UN Security Council, we have always had a seat on a rotating basis. We ran, and other countries supported our position and voted for us to be on that Security Council. First time in history, in the 50-odd years of the UN Security Council, under this government, they didn't even want to run a candidacy for that seat because they knew that we would not get the support of other countries to have that rotating seat on the UN Security Council. So, Mr. Speaker, that is their record. So, on the other hand, you contrast that with our leader. Our leader has actually, was the Minister of Environment, the NDP leader, was the Minister of Environment in Quebec, and he has worked with environmental organizations. He's worked for sustainable development of our resources. So and I can assure you, Mr. Speaker, he will work. Our leader of the NDP, will work with international community to ensure that we have sustainable fisheries, sustainable resources, not only for this generation, but ongoing generations, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, so I would encourage not only the Foreign Affairs Minister, but the Prime Minister to work with other countries, to encourage them to sign this treaty so that we can sustain this very, very valuable resource for not only Canada, but ongoing generations. Mr. Speaker, we talked about this a little bit, but certainly in order for us to implement this law, we need tools of people. You need resources, people. You need additional resources in order to not only provide fisheries and ocean, but also surveillance tools for us to be able to detect this unreported, illegal, and unregulated fishing, Mr. Speaker. And yet we've seen the cuts from under this government that have happened. And not only that, we've seen cuts to the scientific community, to not only they're cutting scientists that are actually going to help us to enhance the fisheries for our Canadian jobs and food, but they're actually muzzling scientists to not even letting them talk about maybe some of the issues and problems that we are having and how we can solve those problems, Mr. Speaker. And on the other hand, and I talked about, Mr. Speaker, on the other hand, on one hand, you need to protect managed fisheries. On the other hand, we need to enhance it. We need to enhance the habitat for our fishing. We need to ensure that they have places where they are protected. And not only protected, we put, under this government, they've taken actually lakes and rivers. 99% of our lakes and rivers are not under environmental protection. And this has happened under this government, Mr. Speaker. So one side, we need to ensure, which is a good step, to make sure that we don't have illegal fishing, we don't have unreported fishing, we don't have unregulated fishing, because we need to preserve and sustain those fisheries. But on the other hand, we also need to ensure that we provide a place, a habitat for these fishing stock to grow. And for that, we need to ensure we make investments in habitat. We need investments in science. We need investments in other resources that'll provide that habitat and for fishing stock to flourish. And under this government, Mr. Speaker, time after time after time, we've seen cuts to whether it's environment, whether it's to our fishing resources. I've heard earlier on a member from my colleague from Quebec, and he talked about where on the East Coast, if the fishing vessel, we need to provide security, we need to provide safety for fishing vessels. The brothers and sisters that go